So Notre Dame Purdue game obviously it's a very important game for Notre Dame. I'm not going to rehash that a whole lot. We did talk about this yesterday, and it's just a game that Notre Dame. It's a must win for Notre Dame, and for all the reasons we explained yesterday. I don't know that this program can recover under its current leadership if you lose a second straight game to an opponent that is just not on your level. I don't know how you in year 3. I don't know how you can recover from that. A win is not everything is fixed, everything is awesome, but at least it gets you back on track, because games like Saturday against Northern Illinois can be just devastating to your program if you don't handle it well. And we're going to find out if this team handles that well. One thing we have seen from Marcus Freeman. So there are trends that are clear of Marcus Freeman. Some are good and some are not so good. One of the not so good trends, and I wrote an article about this on Sunday, is they just occasionally don't show up for games. And I don't understand why. I don't know why. I'm not at practice, so I can't put my finger on it. They gave us very little access to fall camp. So clearly there's things that I couldn't see in fall camp that maybe could have allowed us to have a sense that maybe something like this was coming, but I doubt it, because what we would have seen in fall camp would have been the same team that went out and beat Texas A&M. It's just, we saw it against Marshall, we saw it against Stanford, we saw it against second half against Navy in 2022, we saw it last year against Louisville, we saw it against Clemson last year, and then of course we saw it against Northern Illinois. However, what we have also seen from Marcus Freeman during his tenure is they tend to bounce back pretty well from those type of situations. And that is going to be something to where it gives me some optimism. If we're looking at trends and we're looking at history, Northern Illinois shouldn't have surprised us as much as it did, which is a bad thing. That's not a good thing. That's not a defense. That's actually a really bad thing. But it's also a situation where when you look at this football team, you say they have kind of bounced back well from these moments. Will that continue to be true on Saturday against Purdue? We're going to find out, because I'm going to disagree with my guy Archer. I don't believe this is a 2-4 win football team from Purdue. I don't think this is a great team. I think this is a team that has a shot to be a bowl team this year. They have some very good improvements that they have, some guys that are older from last year. You've got some new transfers in that help them. Their offensive line has been reconfigured a little bit. You've got their best tackles back. So there's some things to say. This is a decent team, but this is a team that Notre Dame should beat, and should beat handily. I just don't know if they will. And that's kind of that's where we're at with this game is, Purdue is not any worse than Northern Illinois. That, and you're going on the road. You're talking about a team that beat Indiana State 49-0. Indiana State's only win in 2023 was over Western Illinois, and Northern Illinois' margin of victory over Western Illinois was comparable to what Indiana and Purdue's was over Indiana State, and they've had 2 weeks to prepare. So when you look at it and you take away all the context of what we saw from Notre Dame last weekend, and you just look at it on paper, this should not be a competitive game. This is a Purdue team that I said I think could potentially be a bowl contender, which puts them at what, 6-6? Where do you think that ranks them in the 18-team Big Ten? 10th, 9th, 10th, 11th? Right? So this is a team that you should dominate. But I don't know that Notre Dame is capable of that right now. I mean, based on what they did this past week. So, I just don't know what to expect from this team. But we're going to talk about who these teams are and who Purdue is, and then the matchups, and then we're all going to find out together on Saturday, what this Notre Dame team is made of, and I'm very curious that we're going to see. We're going to see. So let's get into it. As I said, I'm going to talk about Purdue a little bit as a team. I'm going to get into game records for both teams, and then I'm going to finish with buy, so hold. So let's get ready to rock and roll. Real quick, too, by the way, USMA, I did not put you in timeout, so I'm not sure why you couldn't post, to be honest with you. So I'm not sure. Maybe StreamYard's being a little weird today, or YouTube's being a little weird today. So anyway, let's get rolling on this. So I want to begin with Purdue. And when I look at this Purdue team, here's basically where I see this football team today. And actually, let me just pause for a second because I just want to kind of share something with you guys a little bit. So just to let you guys know, I'm going to try my best to stay locked in today. But today's been a very weird day, and September 11th is always a very strange day for me. I have a hard time focusing. My head is always kind of going in a million different places, and with everything that's been going on with Notre Dame, obviously it's been a challenge. So if I do get a little scatterbrained today, I do apologize in advance. I'm aware of it. I'm going to stay locked in and do the best I can, but I apologize in advance if I do have some of those issues. And yeah, so just wanted to share that with you guys as I restart here. So let's dive into the Purdue Boilermakers, Notre Dame's next opponent on Saturday. Purdue is a team, they're going into year 2 of the Ryan Walters era. Ryan Walters was the defensive coordinator at Illinois in 2022, an Illinois team that was a pretty good football team under Brett Bielema. And then Ryan Walters had obviously success there with Coach Bielema. That allowed him to get the job at Purdue. Prior to that, he was actually there 2 years, 21 and 22. Prior to that, he spent 5 years as either the co-coordinator or the defensive coordinator at Missouri. So he played defensive back at the University of Colorado. They're going into year 2. He's, I think, 39 right now, so he's a younger guy. And he's obviously a defensive-oriented coach, and we're going to dive into their defense, but this is his defense. So when I look at this Purdue team, when you have a defensive head coach, a lot of times that team is going to fit a certain style, and that is true of Purdue. He's trying to recruit size. They want to play strong. They want to be physical. Those are the different things that they want to be, that they want to do as a football team. He's recruiting to that. And this is a pretty big football team, which is partially good because Notre Dame needs to prove that they can handle a big physical football team. But it's also partly bad because Notre Dame hasn't played well against big physical football teams so far this year. And so it does present a test. We talked about this last week. We talked about how Northern Illinois would present a test to Notre Dame because of how they play, the things that they did. And when you look at it and you think about, okay, well, we're sitting in this space a week ago. We're sitting here talking about how, Northern Illinois does this. They've got some athletes that you got to deal with, and they got some size up front, and it's going to be a good test. Well, it was more than a good test. And what gets me a little concerned about this matchup is if we get the version of what Notre Dame we got last week, they do a lot of similar things. I shouldn't say they do a lot of similar things because they're a very different team schematically, but they have a lot of similar traits to what made Northern Illinois a challenge for Notre Dame outside of one very important thing. They're not quite as experienced in this system and in this team as was Northern Illinois. They were a much more experienced football team. And so when I look at this matchup, that is one of my concerns about this matchup is this is a team that very much fits the mold of what right now is giving Notre Dame problems. I don't think it should give Notre Dame problems, but I'm also a realist, and whether or not it should or shouldn't, the fact is it is. And that's something that Notre Dame has to deal with when they get ready for this matchup. So let's begin with the Purdue offense. And you are going to recognize the name of their offensive coordinator is Graham Harrell. If obviously for longtime football fans like me, you remember him as a quarterback at Texas Tech, but he was also the offensive coordinator in the last few years under I am Todd Helton. I always want to say Todd Helton, Clay Helton. He was his offensive coordinator the last couple of years. Notre Dame has faced this offense. It's a little different version of what he did. One of the complaints I had about Graham Harrell when he was at USC was I didn't think they ran the football enough. And I thought that was something that actually kind of held them back a little bit offensively, is I didn't think they ran the football very effectively. His last year there, despite having Keontae Ingram, the Malapau kid, They had Darwin Barlow in 2020. They had Stephen Carr, Marquise Stepp. They didn't run the football very effectively. In 2019, they averaged 118 yards a game. Then they were at 97 in 2020. 2021, they're at 145.6, and they only averaged 4.4 yards per carry. They didn't run the football very well. And they were a very throw-it, perimeter-oriented team. When you look at what Graham Harrell's doing at Purdue, and you started to see this start to show up a lot more late last season, was he has been more willing and focusing on running the football. Now, I think part of that is out of necessity because they don't have great skill players. And, we'll see kind of if that, how that plays out. But they are a team that's had decent running backs the last couple of years. They've got a pretty good offense. They have a solid offensive line. And last year, they showed promise rushing the football. Early in the season, they were very up and down, 109 against Fresno, 179 against Virginia Tech, only 80 against Syracuse. And then they went for 198 against Wisconsin and 189 against Illinois. And then, of course, 96 against Iowa, didn't run much against Ohio State, 123, 96 against Nebraska, only 125 against Michigan. And then they ended the season with 353 against Minnesota, 303 against Northwestern, and 178 against Indiana. Then they started this season off running the football extremely well. They ran for 248 yards in the season opener against Indiana State. Now, again, Indiana State is not a very good football team. They're actually a pretty bad football team, but they did what you're supposed to do. They went for 248 and averaged 8 yards a carry. And so if you look actually at their last 4 games going back to last season, Purdue's last 4 games, like I said, including this weekend's, they're 2 weekends ago game against Indiana State, they're averaging 270.5 rushing yards per game. And we hear a lot, I think Marcus Freeman said this, and I was listening to it on the broadcast of the Indiana State game. They talk about, Purdue was the leading rushing team in the Big Ten last year. Well, kind of. They were the leading rushing team in conference play last year, but they were 3rd overall in rushing because they only averaged 169.1 yards per game. But in conference, so obviously that started a little bit later. In conference, however, Purdue averaged 184.6 yards per game because, as I mentioned, they had a couple of those big performances running the football. So while true that they were obviously the top team in conference, and the next closest team was 14 yards behind them, over the course of the entire season, they were only at 169, which backs up kind of what I said, which is they got a hot late and piled up some big stats late, but also had a couple good games late in September. And then that really rough stretch. But the rough stretch included 4 games in a row against Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Michigan. That is very clearly the 4 best defenses they played last year. And they were barely over 100 yards per game in those games. So it's a team that wants to run the football, but their success has been a little up and down. But you're going to see that from this offense. You're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of quick perimeter screens. That's what you're going to see. They're going to run now screens. They're going to run bubbles. They're going to do a lot of different things motion-wise to try to get the ball on the perimeter and, try to get the ball to their playmakers. So when I look at Purdue, this version of Purdue, and you look at what they have on their offensive line, this is also a team that has, as I mentioned, a little bit of size up front. In spots, their left to right, there's 318, 300, 305, 316, and 300. So a couple guys that are 300-pounders, but then a couple other guys that are cropping up to 320. Size-wise, they're very similar to Northern Illinois. A little bigger in a couple spots, about the same in some other spots, and we watched Northern Illinois push Notre Dame around. And they're a veteran group. Their left tackle, center, and right guard are all seniors, and then there's left guard and right tackle are both juniors. So this isn't a young group of players. These are guys that want to come out and, as I said, run the football on you. I mean, first play of the game against Indiana State's a stretch play. So, hey, Notre Dame, you might want to actually be prepared to handle a stretch play and get pushed around. And that's obviously the matchup of this game that concerns me a little bit. Look, their pass catchers are decent on the perimeter. They're solid. They got one kid who's got some size to him. He didn't play last year, Jamal Edrine. He transferred in from Florida Atlantic 2 years ago. Shamar Rigby, 6'3". Jerron Tibbs is 6'3", 214. Cam Brown, transfer from UCLA. He did not play in the opener. I don't know if he's on the depth chart. He didn't play in the opener. He's 6'1", 185. The Nylon Morissette, I don't think he caught maybe one ball. He's 6'1", 200. Leland Smith is 6'4", 219. Their tight end, Max Clare, is 6'4", 240. Drew Bibber is the tight end who caught some balls on Saturday, the first game. He's 6'5", 245. So they have some big receivers. And so what I see them doing is quick perimeter throws and then trying to get the ball down the field to their bigger receivers. They're going to do some perimeter, back shoulder out cuts and things like that in regard to their receivers. And then, of course, they're going to use tempo a little bit to try to get you off base. They're going to move guys around. Graham Harrell does a nice job of mixing up personnel groupings and mixing up alignments, using some quick shifts and motions to try to gain some leverage, which a lot of teams do. And teams are definitely going to do that now against Notre Dame, but they do have a solid offensive line, do have solid pass catchers. And Hudson Card's a mobile quarterback. He's not a dynamic athlete at quarterback, but he's a mobile quarterback. He can hurt you. If Connor Wegman can hurt you as a runner, so can Hudson Card. And that's not a knock on Connor Wegman. I actually think Connor Wegman was a pretty good athlete in high school. It's simply saying, like, this is a similar type of kid, probably a little bit more athletic than Connor Wegman was. Or he's definitely more athletic, but a little bit more effective as a runner than Connor Wegman, because he can not only hurt you from the standpoint of scrambles if you lose discipline, but he's also a guy that they can do some things, bootlegs and read zones that can also hurt you and be effective in that regard. So that's how I look at this Purdue offense. It's not super talented. It's relatively well coached. They're experienced at the positions that matter most: quarterback, offensive line, tight end. Their youth is all on the perimeter at wide receiver. They've got some freshmen and sophomores playing at wide receiver. Youth doesn't bother me as much at that position. They're very experienced in the places that matter. And that's where Notre Dame is going to be challenged in this game. So Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for that. Let's go to the opposite side of the field. And Ryan and I were chatting actually before the show, and so you don't see a whole lot of coaches anymore that run just 3-4 defense, just pure 3-4 defense. And they run pure 3-4 defense. I was actually going back and looking at the Ohio State game last year, and it was wild because even when Ohio State's in 11 personnel and not even in a situation where they're like in a run look, just 1st and 10, spreading the field, you'd still see Purdue in their 3-5 look. I'm actually going to take a little bit of a screenshot here. That's who they want to be. They want to be a team that is going to play 3-4. They want to get their big guys on the field. Here, let me get this clip up so you guys, this photo up so you guys can get a sample of what I'm talking about here. They are going to play the 3-4, their 3-4 defense, and they got 2 edge players that have some size to them. They're very big up the middle. The guards for Notre Dame and center are going to have a very long day. So let's look at this picture here real quick. You guys get a sense of it. This is against Ohio State last year. You can see Ohio State's in 11 personnel. They're in a 3-by-1 alignment, and Purdue is still in their 3-5 look. Now, there's some things that are going to present some opportunities for Notre Dame, which we'll get into tomorrow during our Keys to Victory. But as you can see this right here, against Purdue, you're seeing, or against Ohio State last year, a team that throws the ball quite a bit. They are still in their 3-5 alignment with the 3 down. So that is who Purdue is. They like to stay in that. They'll mix up some things a little bit. They'll drop guys into coverage and things along those lines, but they want to stay in that 3-4 personnel. They'll get real creative on 3rd down. That's when they'll mix up their personnel groupings and they'll do some different things from a look standpoint. That's when they'll blitz more. They don't blitz a ton. In 1st and 2nd down, they'll bring some like linebacker fires and edge pressures, but you're not going to see a real exotic situation. They're going to be physical. They're going to come at you. They're going to play downhill. That's what Purdue wants to do, and that's what they're going to try to do to Notre Dame in this game. So, and especially when you've seen what Notre Dame has done the first 2 weeks, I don't know how any team looks at Notre Dame right now and says, hey, let's put more athletes on the field because we're worried about them throwing the football. No, the only thing that Notre Dame has done at all well this year is run the football. And that's even been at times. So you're going to see them be very aggressive in that regard. And they want to, like I said, they got a very big interior. If you go look at their depth chart, which we have the Purdue depth chart at irishbreakdown.com, they go a true 3 down, 3 big guys alignment. They have Cole Brevard, who starts for them, number 91. He's an Indiana kid. He's 6'3", 333. If you go back and watch Ohio State game, I think it's like the first play of the game. They drop back to throw, and he just takes this guy, drives him right back into the backfield, discards him, and gets in the quarterback's face. Mo Omodode is my best shot at that, is the one smaller guy they have. He's 6 foot 286. The rest of their D-line, their number 0, Jeffrey Mba, really good football player, really solid football player, 6'6", 302. Joe Anderson plays a decent amount. He's 6'4", 290. And they got a kid named DeMarge Lewis, who I like a lot as well, number 34. He was pretty good against Indiana State. He's 6'3", 300. So this is a very good-sized unit. And they have 2 true outside linebackers. Shita Silla, 6'4", 251. He's a transfer. He's on one side. And then on the other side, Will Helt is a really good football player. Another in-state kid, 6'6", 265. Very talented player. Ryan and I were talking. He was talking to me about him the other day. He was popping the film on, and I'm like, this 15 is a pretty good football player. I see what you're talking about. Very long, quality athlete. He's more of a power athlete, in my opinion. He's a guy that could present some problems for the Notre Dame edge players. And then their middle linebacker, Kydron Jenkins, for some reason, he was an edge player for them last year. They moved him to middle linebacker. And he's a 6'1", 253-pound little middle linebacker. And then Yanni Karlaftis, Notre Dame fans should remember that name, not just because he's George's younger brother, but Yanni was recruited a little bit by Notre Dame for a while, is a 6'3", 235-pound linebacker. So as you guys can see, this is a very big, physical front seven, really. And Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared to handle that. That does present some concerning matchups, in my opinion, for this Notre Dame football team, because that's not something they've handled very well so far this year. So it's going to be a challenge. This offensive line is going to have to play well for Notre Dame, and they're going to have to be prepared for that, because this whole like, here's the thing. Like, a lot of us are saying, like, what are we saying? Like, I'm load the box and play the deep, stop the run, force them to beat you with the pass. Well, that's kind of already what Purdue does. So it doesn't even require Purdue to have to adjust anything. They just have to play their defense, and Notre Dame's going to have to try to do something about it, because they're a team that when I look at this matchup, I see a Notre Dame team that's struggling to throw the football against a Purdue defense that doesn't have great secondary players outside of one player. They're solid, but there's a lot of matchups that should favor Notre Dame on paper. I see a Notre Dame team that's a little undersized on offense, very young on the offensive line, hasn't really been consistently getting a push in the run game against a really big physical defensive line that, when you look at how they performed last season, their rushing offense got a lot better last year. Their rushing defense got a lot better as well. And this is what they're designed to do. Early in the year, they struggled. They held Virginia Tech to 11, but they gave up 271 to Syracuse. They gave up 195 to Wisconsin, 149 to Illinois, 181 to Iowa, 152 to Ohio State, and 155 to Nebraska. And so obviously you're like, well, that's not real good. Well, then the last 4 games of the season, the most they gave up in any period of time was against Indiana, and they gave up 233 yards. But in the last 4 games of the year, they only gave up 114.3 yards per game and then 3.5 yards per carry. Well, in the opener against Indiana State, they held them to 104 yards rushing on 43 carries. It's only 2.4 yards per carry. So they started to figure out how that defense works, and they got better and better late in the season. And here's the thing about that. This wasn't against 4 bad opponents. The team that they got started off with was against Michigan. They held Michigan 110 rushing yards on 34 carries. Now, they got ripped up in the passing game, which is what we talked about, but Michigan only averaged 3.2 yards per carry in that game. They held Minnesota down, but then they shut down Northwestern's run game and held Northwestern to 2.9 yards per carry and 99 yards. So what you should want to do against this Notre Dame team right now is exactly what Purdue already does. And it's just like, hey, lean into who you are. And that's what I expect them to see. I don't think they need to do anything unique this weekend to, quote unquote, load the box. That's who Purdue already is. And Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for that, because they're gonna basically say, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat us throwing the football. That is absolutely, to me, how this game is going to go. And now, this doesn't mean Notre Dame abandons the run. There's ways to have a success running the ball. We'll talk about that tomorrow in the Keys to Victory. Notre Dame can and should be able to run the football with the talent they have. If you have to abandon the run because of how good Purdue is, this is going to be a long season for Notre Dame. Very long season for Notre Dame, because this is a quality front seven. It is nothing compared to what some of the other teams that they're going to have to face this year are going to throw at Notre Dame in the front seven, especially from an athleticism standpoint. But I'm just telling you, this is what they do. This is who they are. And Notre Dame's going to have to find some ways to go at it and have some success. So that's a little bit about this Purdue team. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. We'll talk more about them tomorrow in the keys to victory as far as just who they are overall and what Notre Dame needs to do with them. But that's a quick look at what you can expect from Purdue. They are, again, folks, just preparing you. They are not going to be afraid of Notre Dame. Northern Illinois wasn't afraid of Notre Dame, and Purdue is definitely not going to be afraid of Notre Dame. Opponents for Notre Dame can see like this is there's opportunities to find some success against Notre Dame right now. And for a guy like Ryan Walters, this could be a program-defining win because as somebody was talking about earlier, again, I think Purdue is not a 2-4 win football team. I don't think they're that. I think they're better than that. But they do have a tough schedule this year. They play at Oregon State, Nebraska, at Wisconsin, at Illinois, home against Oregon, home against Northwestern, at Ohio State, home against Penn State, at Michigan State, at Indiana. There's a lot of potential wins on there. There's also a lot of potential losses on there. You've got, if you can catch this struggling Notre Dame team, this down Notre Dame team, and get a win, this is a career-defining moment for Ryan Walters. If they do struggle a little bit this year because of how tough their schedule is, then this is something that they could do. And that's the mentality that they're going to have coming into this game. This is a huge game for Purdue, and Notre Dame needs to match that. They need to be prepared to handle that. And if they can't, then this is gonna be a long year. But hopefully they'll be able to match that because, again, on paper, this is a game that should not be overly competitive. But the way that Notre Dame is playing right now, it's going to be a dogfight if Notre Dame doesn't find some answers and find them in a hurry.